The cold winter wind of 1876 sliced through the cemetery like a knife, but Clara Daniels barely felt it, her body numb with grief as she stood motionless before the freshly dug grave. The wooden marker was crude, hastily made just like the life that had been hastily taken. Her father, once the pillar of strength in their small Montana homestead, now lay 6 feet beneath the frozen earth, victim to a ruthless gang that had terrorized their region for months. "Miss Daniels." A deep voice broke through her fog of despair. "The sun's setting. It ain't safe to be out here alone." Clara didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the voice she recognized as belonging to Lucas Vance, the ranch hand who'd worked alongside her father for the past 2 years. His boots crunched on the frost-covered ground as he approached, coming to stand beside her. "I can't leave him," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not yet." Lucas removed his hat, holding it respectfully at his chest. His weathered face showed signs of the same grief, though differently worn. At 28, he'd seen death before, but Thomas Daniels had been more than an employer. "He was a good man," Lucas said. "Best I ever knew." Clara nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. At 23, she'd never imagined being so utterly alone. Her mother had passed years ago, and now with her father gone, the responsibility of their struggling cattle ranch fell squarely on her shoulders, a burden she wasn't sure she could bear. "They'll come back," she said flatly. "The Harmon Gang. They didn't get what they wanted." Lucas's jaw tightened. The infamous Harmon Gang had been demanding protection money from all the local ranchers. Thomas Daniels had refused to pay, standing his ground against the outlaws. His defiance had cost him his life. "I know," Lucas replied, his voice hardening. He hesitated, then gently took her gloved hand in his. "But we'll face this together, Miss Daniels. I promise you that." Clara finally looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes, deep blue like the Montana sky in summer, held a fierce determination that somehow penetrated the ice that had formed around her heart. "I don't want anyone else to die for me or my land," she said. "And I don't intend to die," he replied with a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But I don't intend to run either." As the last light faded from the winter sky, Clara allowed Lucas to lead her away from the grave, his hand still holding hers, warm and steady. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt something besides despair, a tiny flicker of resolve. The ride back to the Daniels homestead was silent. The creaking of the wagon and the gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sounds breaking through the stillness of the winter evening. Clara sat rigid beside Lucas, her back straight despite the exhaustion that threatened to consume her. "You should eat something when we get back," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "You haven't had a proper meal in days." "I'm not hungry," she replied automatically. Lucas didn't push, but as they approached the ranch, he said, "Your father built this place from nothing. He'd want you to fight for it." The small ranch house came into view, a lamp burning in the window. Mrs. Peterson, the widow from the neighboring farm who had been helping since Thomas's death, had kept it lit for their return. Beyond the house stood the barn and corrals, and beyond that, the vast stretches of grazing land that had been in the Daniels family for 15 years. As they pulled up to the hitching post, Clara noticed something wasn't right. The front door of the house stood slightly ajar, lamplight spilling onto the porch. "Stay here," Lucas said, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "No," Clara said firmly, grabbing her father's shotgun from the wagon bed. "This is my home." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue but gave a curt nod instead. They approached the house together, Lucas leading with his revolver drawn. They paused at the door, and with a quick nod to Clara, Lucas pushed it open. Sheriff Martin Bell sat at their kitchen table, his hat on his knee and a cup of coffee in front of him. Mrs. Peterson stood nervously by the stove. "Evening, Clara. Lucas," the sheriff said, rising to his feet. "I apologize for startling you. Mrs. Peterson was kind enough to let me wait inside." "What brings you here, Sheriff?" Lucas asked, not lowering his gun entirely. "News," Sheriff Bell said grimly. "The Harmon Gang hit the Wilsons' place this afternoon. Burned their barn to the ground when Henry refused to pay." Clara felt her blood run cold. "Was anyone hurt?" "Just scared, thankfully. Henry was in town when it happened. Mrs. Wilson and the children hid in the root cellar." The sheriff looked directly at Clara. "But they left a message, Clara. Said yours would be next." Mrs. Peterson gasped, clutching her apron. "Lord have mercy." Lucas holstered his weapon, his face hardening. "Sheriff, with all due respect, what are you doing to stop these men? They've killed Thomas, threatened half the county." "I've wired for help from the marshal's office," Sheriff Bell interrupted. "But until they send someone, my hands are tied. I've got one deputy and a town to protect. These men outnumber us, and they're ruthless. So we just wait to be slaughtered?" Clara asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear churning inside her. The sheriff had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm not saying that. I'm saying be careful. Maybe consider what your neighbors are doing. Pay what they ask, just until help arrives." "Pay the men who murdered my father?" Clara's voice rose. "I would rather burn this place to the ground myself." Sheriff Bell sighed, standing and placing his hat on his head. "I understand your feelings, Clara, truly I do. But I've got 5 dead ranchers in 3 counties. I don't want to add your name to that list." He moved toward the door, pausing beside her. "Your father was my friend. He was stubborn too." After the sheriff left, Mrs. Peterson insisted on serving dinner, though no one had much appetite. She departed soon after, promising to return in the morning. Clara sat at the table long after the dishes were cleared, staring at the flame of the oil lamp. Lucas remained too, silent but present, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "You don't have to stay," Clara finally said. "I can manage." Lucas looked up from his whittling. "I promised your father I'd look after the ranch if anything happened to him. I intend to keep that promise." "And get yourself killed in the process?" she challenged. "I've survived worse odds." He set down his knife. "Miss Daniels, Clara, I've been riding these territories since I was 16. I've worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. I faced Comanche raids and claim jumpers. I'm not saying I can't be killed, but I won't go down easy." Clara studied him in the lamplight. She'd known Lucas for 2 years, but she realized she knew very little about him beyond his skill with horses and cattle. He'd always been respectful, keeping a proper distance as her father's employee. Now, something in his steady gaze made her heart beat a little faster. "Why would you risk your life for this place?" "For me?" she asked softly. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "Your father gave me a chance when others wouldn't. A man with no family, no references. He trusted me." He looked around the modest cabin. "And this place, it's the closest thing to a home I've had in a long while." Clara felt tears threaten again, but she blinked them back. "What's your plan, then?" "First, we secure the ranch. Tomorrow we'll move the cattle closer to the house where we can keep an eye on them. I'll ask some of the hands from neighboring ranches to help men I trust. And then," Lucas's expression darkened, "then we wait. The Harmons will come, but we'll be ready." That night, Clara lay awake in her bed, listening to the wind howl outside her window. Across the hall, she could hear Lucas's soft footsteps as he checked the windows and doors one final time before settling into the small guest room. His presence gave her comfort, though she hated to admit it. Her father had always said she was too independent for her own good. Stubborn as a mountain mule, he'd joke. That stubbornness had served her well after her mother died, when she'd taken over the running of the household at 15. It had carried her through learning ranch management when other young women were learning needlepoint. But now, in the darkness, Clara wondered if stubborn independence would be enough to face what was coming. For the first time in her life, she was grateful not to be alone. Morning arrived crisp and clear, the sun glinting off the snow-covered landscape. Clara rose early, dressing in her work clothes, sturdy trousers beneath her skirt, a warm flannel shirt, and her father's old sheepskin coat. When she entered the kitchen, Lucas was already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup. "I fed the horses and checked the perimeter. Everything's quiet." "Thank you," she said, accepting the coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the chill in the room. They worked side by side all day, moving cattle to the pasture nearest the house, repairing fences and reinforcing the barn doors. By mid-afternoon, 3 trusted hands from neighboring ranches had arrived to help men who had worked with her father during busy seasons and owed him favors. Clara watched from the corral as Lucas instructed the men, his natural leadership evident in the way they responded to him. In the harsh winter sunlight, she noticed things about him she'd never paid attention to before: the way his shoulders filled out his coat, the confidence in his movements, the respect in the other men's eyes when he spoke. "Miss Daniels," a voice called, breaking her reverie. She turned to see Eddie Taylor, one of the ranch hands, approaching. "We've got the south fence secure. Lucas wants to know if you have more ammunition for the rifles." "In my father's study," she replied. "I'll get it." As she walked back to the house, Clara caught sight of a rider approaching from the east, Mrs. Peterson's son, David, galloping hard. Something was wrong. She ran to meet him as he reined in his lathered horse. "David? What is it?" The young man, barely 18, was breathless. "Ma sent me. The Harmon Gang was spotted in town this morning. 6 of them, including Jake Harmon himself. They were asking questions about your place." Lucas appeared at her side, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "Did they follow you?" David shook his head. "Don't think so. I took the creek path, kept to the trees." "How many men does Harmon have total?" Lucas asked. 10, maybe 12, David replied. "Mean as snakes, all of them." Lucas nodded grimly. "Thank your mother for the warning. You should head back before dark." After David left, Lucas gathered the men to share the news. Clara stood among them, refusing to be excluded from the planning. "They'll likely come at night," Lucas said. "They prefer the advantage of surprise. We'll take shifts watching. 2 men at a time, rotating every 4 hours." "I'll take a shift," Clara said firmly. The men exchanged glances, but Lucas met her gaze steadily. "Your father taught you to shoot?" "Since I was 12. I can hit a can at 50 paces with his Winchester." Lucas nodded. "You'll take the midnight shift with me. Eddie and Tom, you take first watch. Jim and Pete, you're after them. Everyone else get some rest while you can." As the men dispersed, Lucas turned to Clara. "You should try to sleep too. It's going to be a long night." "I don't think I could sleep if I tried," she admitted. "Then let's check the rifles one more time," he suggested. His hand briefly touching her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that lingered in her mind long afterward. The evening passed with excruciating slowness. Clara tried to busy herself with mending, but her thoughts kept returning to the men who had murdered her father, who were now coming for her home. Occasionally, she glanced at Lucas, who sat cleaning his revolver by the fire, his face a mask of concentration. "Why did you come west?" she asked suddenly, needing conversation to fill the tense silence. Lucas looked up, surprised by the question. "Nothing for me back east. My parents died when I was young." Aunt raised me in Ohio, but she passed when I was 16. Figured the frontier offered more opportunity than factory work. No wife? Family? The question was bold, but Clara felt past the point of propriety. A shadow crossed his face. Almost once, in Kansas, she preferred a man with steadier prospects. A shopkeeper. He smiled wryly. Can't blame her. Ranch hands don't make for stable husbands. Clara nodded, understanding all too well the hardships of ranch life. And yet you stayed with it. Some men aren't made for towns and parlors, he said simply. I need open skies above me and a good horse beneath me. He hesitated, then asked, What about you? No suitors coming calling? Pretty young woman like yourself. Clara felt a blush creep into her cheeks, annoyed at her reaction. Not many eligible bachelors in these parts. Besides, I've had the ranch to think about. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Lucas immediately stood, hand on his holster, but it was only Eddie, coming to report that all was quiet outside. Midnight came, and Clara donned her father's coat and hat, taking the Winchester rifle from its place above the fireplace. Lucas watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. Nothing, he said, shaking his head slightly. Just, you remind me of him. Same determination. They relieved Tom and Eddie at the barn, where they had a clear view of the approach to the ranch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air as they stood side by side, watching the darkness. Tell me about your father, Lucas said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Clara smiled despite herself. He was the strongest man I've ever known, not just physically. He believed in things: justice, hard work, keeping your word. When my mother died, he could have sent me back east to relatives, but he kept me here. Said we were a team. He was proud of you, Lucas said. Used to tell me you were worth 10 men when it came to ranch work. This surprised her. He said that. Lucas nodded. All the time. Said you had your mother's beauty but his stubborn will. Said it would serve you well. Clara felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. I hope he was right. They fell into a comfortable silence, scanning the darkness. The hours of their watch passed without incident, and as dawn approached, Clara found herself strangely disappointed that their time alone was ending. As they walked back to the house in the gray pre-dawn light, Lucas suddenly stopped, grabbing her arm. Listen. Clara held her breath. In the distance, she could hear it, the thunder of approaching horses. Get to the house, Lucas ordered, already running toward the bunkhouse to alert the men. Ring the warning bell. Clara ran, her heart pounding. She reached the heavy iron bell that hung by the kitchen door used to call men in from distant fields and began to ring it frantically. The clanging shattered the morning stillness, and immediately men began pouring from the bunkhouse, weapons in hand. Lucas was shouting orders, positioning men behind the corral fences, in the barn loft, beside the house. Clara grabbed her rifle and took position by the front window, where she had a clear view of the approaching riders. They came out of the morning mist like apparitions, 8 men on horseback, riding hard for the ranch. At their head was a large man with a bushy black beard, wearing a long duster coat. Jake Harmon, she presumed, the man responsible for her father's death. The riders pulled up about 50 yards from the house, just out of effective rifle range. Harmon raised his hand, and the men behind him stopped. Clara Daniels, he shouted. Come on out, girl. Let's talk business. Lucas appeared beside her at the window. Stay inside, he said firmly. This is my fight, she replied. Our fight, he corrected. But we do this smart. He raised his voice. Harmon, Miss Daniels isn't interested in your kind of business. Harmon laughed, a sound that carried easily across the yard. Who's that? You got yourself a protector, girl? Didn't help your pa much, did it? Clara felt rage boil inside her. Before Lucas could stop her, she moved to the door, flinging it open but staying in the doorway, rifle visible in her hands. What do you want, Harmon? She called out. Same thing I wanted from your pa, he replied. Protection money. These are dangerous times. 20% of your cattle ought to cover it. That would ruin us, she said. Harmon shrugged. Better ruined than dead. Your pa made his choice. What's yours? Clara felt Lucas behind her, solid and steady. We don't deal with murderers, she called back. Now get off my land before we put you in the ground next to my father. Harmon's face darkened. Big words for a little girl. Let's see how brave you are when your house is burning around you. He turned to his men. Burn them out, boys. As the riders spurred their horses forward, gunfire erupted from the ranch buildings. The first volley caught the outlaws by surprise. 2 men fell from their saddles immediately. The others scattered, seeking cover. Lucas pulled Clara back inside, slamming the door. Stay low, he ordered, moving to a window to return fire. The next minutes were chaos: gunshots, shouting, the terrified whinnying of horses. Clara crawled to another window, raised her rifle, and sighted on a man trying to approach the barn with a torch. She squeezed the trigger and he dropped, the torch falling harmlessly to the ground. Good shot, Lucas said from across the room, his voice tight with concentration. The gunfight continued, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Then Clara heard a crash from the back of the house. The kitchen, she cried, already moving. She reached the kitchen door just as it burst open, revealing Jake Harmon himself, pistol drawn. Without thinking, Clara swung her rifle like a club, catching him across the face. He staggered back, blood streaming from his nose, but didn't fall. His hand shot out, grabbing her throat. Should have taken the deal, girl, he snarled, raising his pistol. A shot rang out, and Harmon's eyes widened in surprise. His grip on Clara's throat loosened as he looked down at the blooming red stain on his chest. Behind him stood Lucas, revolver still raised. Harmon fell to his knees, then face forward onto the kitchen floor. Outside, the gunfire was already diminishing as the remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. Clara stood frozen, staring at Harmon's body. Lucas crossed to her in 2 strides, holstering his weapon and taking her face in his hands. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice rough with concern. She shook her head, unable to speak. His thumbs gently brushed her cheeks, and she realized she was crying. It's over, he said softly. It's over now. In the days that followed, life at the Daniels ranch slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Sheriff Bell arrived the morning after the attack, surveying the damage with a mixture of admiration and concern. For dead, including Jake Harmon himself, he said, shaking his head. The others won't be back. Without Jake, they'll scatter like wolves without an alpha. Clara stood on the porch, watching as the bodies were loaded into a wagon for burial in the town cemetery. No markers would bear their names. Outlaws deserved no such honors. Lucas approached, his arm in a makeshift sling where a bullet had grazed him during the fight. Sheriff says the marshal's office is sending someone to track down the remaining gang members. It's really over, Clara. She nodded, still processing everything that had happened. The ranch had suffered damage, bullet holes in buildings, a section of fence destroyed. 1 cow lost to stray gunfire, but it was still standing. She was still standing. What happens now? She asked quietly. Lucas leaned against the porch railing, his good shoulder close to hers. That depends on you. The ranch needs work, but spring's coming. With a good calving season, you could recover your losses. You say you, not we, she observed, something tightening in her chest. Lucas looked away, across the fields that stretched toward the distant mountains. Your father hired me to work for him. That arrangement. I wasn't sure if it still stood. Where would you go? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. He shrugged his good shoulder. There's always work for a good ranch hand. Montana's full of possibilities. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. And if I asked you to stay? Lucas turned to her then, his blue eyes searching her face. As your employee? No, she said softly. Not as an employee. Something changed in his expression, hope mingled with uncertainty. Clara, I don't have much to offer a woman like you. No land of my own, no fortune. I have land, she interrupted. And I don't need a fortune. I need. She paused, finding the words. I need someone who understands this life, who isn't afraid of hard work and long winters. Someone who would stand beside me at my father's grave and promise we'd face things together. Lucas's hand found hers on the porch railing, his rough fingers entwining with her smaller ones. I meant that promise, he said, his voice low and earnest. Every word. I know, she replied, squeezing his hand. That's why I'm asking you to stay. The first kiss they shared was tentative, gentle, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. When they parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. His eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. I should do this proper, he murmured. Court you like a gentleman would. Clara laughed softly. Lucas, we've faced death together. I think we're past the point of proper courtship. His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. Even so, some things shouldn't be rushed. True to his word, Lucas courted Clara through the spring and summer of 1877. He moved back to the bunkhouse despite her protests, insisting on propriety until they were properly wed. Each Sunday he would arrive at the house with freshly cut wildflowers or a small trinket from town, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, once even a small silver locket he'd saved 3 months to purchase. They worked side by side during the days, rebuilding what had been damaged, strengthening what remained. Under their joint care, the ranch flourished. The spring calving season was better than they'd hoped, and by midsummer, the Daniels Ranch was becoming known as one of the most promising operations in the territory. Clara watched Lucas with the new hands they'd hired, firm but fair, quick to teach, slow to anger. She saw how the men respected him, not just for his skill with cattle and horses, but for his integrity. In those moments, she would find herself falling even deeper in love with him, amazed at how her life had transformed from deepest grief to profound joy in the span of mere months. They were married on a bright September day, with half the county in attendance. Sheriff Bell gave the bride away, and Mrs. Peterson wept happily in the front row. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As they spoke their vows beneath the big cottonwood tree where her parents had been wed 25 years earlier, Clara felt her father's presence, approving and at peace. That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they gazed at the star-filled sky. Mrs. Vance, he said, testing the name on his tongue. I still can't believe it. Clara leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth. Believe it. You're stuck with me and this ranch for good now. His arms tightened around her. No place I'd rather be stuck. After a moment, he added more seriously, I promise you, Clara, I'll work every day to be worthy of both. She turned in his arms, placing her hand against his cheek. You already are. My father saw it before I did. Your father was a wise man, Lucas said, his eyes solemn. Yes, she agreed. He knew what I needed, even when I didn't. 5 years later, Clara stood once again in the small cemetery, but this time the occasion was not one of grief. Beside her, Lucas held their 3-year-old son, Thomas, named for the grandfather he would never meet. Her free hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she was certain would arrive before winter. He would have loved being a grandfather, Clara said, placing fresh wildflowers on her father's well-tended grave. Lucas set little Thomas down, watching as the boy solemnly placed a small rock he'd found on the wooden marker. He is, in a way, Lucas replied. Every time I tell Thomas stories about him, every time I see his stubbornness in you or our son. Clara smiled, taking his hand. Do you ever think about how we began? Standing here, after the worst day of my life. Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think about it often, how close we came to losing everything. How much we've gained since then. The Vance Ranch, as it was now known, had prospered beyond their expectations. They'd added 200 acres to the original property, built a larger barn, and were considering expanding into horse breeding alongside their successful cattle operation. More importantly, they'd built a family and a community around them, a place of safety and belonging in the still wild territory. We've been blessed, Clara said simply. Lucas squeezed her hand. We have, but it wasn't just blessing. It was courage too. Yours especially. She shook her head. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. That's what makes it courage, he countered. Being afraid but standing your ground anyway. Like you did that day with Harmon. Like you do every day. Building this life with me. Thomas had wandered a few steps away, fascinated by a butterfly. Clara watched him, her heart full of love for this child, who combined the best of both of them, Lucas's calm steadiness and her own determined spirit. I never imagined this life, she admitted. After my father died, I couldn't see a future at all, just survival. Lucas put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against his side. And now, Clara looked up at her husband, at the lines that 5 years of sun and wind and laughter had etched more deeply around his eyes, at the absolute devotion that still shone there when he looked at her. Now I see everything, she said softly, everything worth having. As they walked back to their waiting wagon, Thomas running ahead to chase the butterfly, Clara felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun in grief had transformed into something beautiful, a family, a legacy, a love that had been forged in fire and had emerged stronger for it. Lucas helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands lingering at her waist. Ready to go home, Mrs. Vance? Clara smiled, thinking of the home they had built together, of the years that stretched before them, years that would hold challenges and joys in equal measure, but that they would face side by side. Yes, she said, her heart full. Let's go home.